From the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, this is Nebraska Farmcast. I'm Ryan Evans, and I recently spoke with Dr. Larry Van Tassell, Agricultural Economics Professor here at UNL and Director of our Center for Agricultural Profitability, about foreign ag land ownership in the U.S. You can find that article and podcast on our site at cap.unl.edu, and on this episode, I am glad to be speaking with Larry again, this time about another article covering his research into foreign ag land ownership here in the state of Nebraska. He used the latest data from USDA's Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Act for this article, and he's here to explore some key findings, and we'll get his perspective on what this data means for Nebraska farmers, ranchers, and landowners. Thanks for joining me again, Larry.
Pleasure to be here, Ryan.
So what does the AFIDA report, that is the Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Act that we mentioned, what does that report tell us about foreign investment in U.S. agricultural land overall?
Well, first of all, Ryan, foreign investment in U.S. agricultural lands has increased over the past decade or so, with around 3.1% of U.S. ag lands held by foreign entities. Texas has the distinction of having the most acreage held by foreign entities, almost 5.3 million acres, which amounts to about 3.4% of Texas's acreage. But Maine holds the number one spot for the highest percentage of agricultural land held by foreigners, with just over 20% of their acreage under foreign control. The largest portion of that is held by Canadian companies for timber production.
Turning to Nebraska, what were some of the key findings from the 2021 AFIDA report on foreign holdings of ag lands here in the state?
Foreign entities representing 20 countries have an interest in just under 800,000 acres of Nebraska's ag lands, mainly the cropland. That's about 1.8% of Nebraska's ag land. Nearly 75% of those ag lands are under Canadian control, with another 18% under Italian interests. Chinese ownership is limited, with 20 acres in Hamilton County being owned by Syngenta Seeds, whose parent company is ChemChina. In addition, 77 acres in Douglas County are under individual ownership by persons from Hong Kong. Interestingly, another 125 acres in Lancaster County are owned by an individual from the Islamic Republic of Iran. The reason this is of interest is because of various bills being considered by the U.S. government and various states that are intended to prohibit control of land by entities from hostile foreign countries, namely China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
Okay, and you have a new article up on our website, cap.unl.edu. It's linked to in the podcast here, and in that, reading it appears that long-term land leases, rather than just purchasing the land outright, are the most common type of foreign interest in Nebraska ag land. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's first of all important to understand that according to AFIDA guidelines, if a foreign entity has a 10-year or greater lease on the land, it is considered to be under foreign control. These long-term leases represent, for the most part, foreign wind and solar generation companies. As you are probably aware, current U.S. policy provides tax benefits and other incentives for investing in clean energy that foreign companies are also able to benefit from. Examining the company titles of all foreign owners of agricultural land in Nebraska reveals that of the 1,992 parcels reported, almost 95% of the entities had wind or solar in their company name. This represented almost 94% of the acreage acquired.
Going back to the countries where ownership is coming from here in Nebraska, the breakdown you have shows that over 90% of foreign-held acres in Nebraska on ag land are, again, Canadian and Italian interests, which you talked about. Did that align with what you expected to see? I know obviously in the news we hear a lot about concerns about China and things like that, but Canadian and Italian interests clearly lead the way in Nebraska.
Yeah, that's right. That high percentage of interest by just two foreign countries was definitely surprising to me. especially the Italian investment, that was so high. But all of the acreage under Italian interests was represented from just two companies, the Haystack Wind Project, LLC, and the Grand Prairie Wind, LLC.
The data does show a spike in foreign ag land transactions in Nebraska starting back in 2009. So what do you think contributed to the increase around that time?
Well, Ryan, of the foreign controlled acreage in Nebraska, almost 98% of those holdings were established between 2009 and 2021, which is the last year we have data from. The greater part were long-term leases. In examining the companies that hold these leases, again, almost all had wind or solar in their name, so clean energy boom was the major contributor, it appeared.
Yeah, and expanding on that, with so many of the foreign entities that are investing in Nebraska ag lands tied to renewable energy, like wind and solar, how do you see energy trends impacting land ownership patterns going forward?
Well, as long as the U.S. policy continues to provide incentives for clean energy generation, I really expect to see some of these large foreign companies compete for additional long-term leases on our ag lands.
And Nebraska farmers, ranchers, landowners listening to this, is there any takeaway you have for them or advice on the implications of all this rising foreign investment in the state?
Well, first of all, after examining the data, I personally am not as concerned with foreign ownership of Nebraska lands, as the vast majority of that ownership, as we've talked about, appears to be long-term leases for clean energy generation and not ownership of the underlying lands. Most of the time, the owner of the land continues to farm that land and benefits financially from the long-term clean energy leases. The only concern would be if those foreign interests fell under the control of hostile governments and they were able to disrupt the energy generation in the United States. Also, as I mentioned in a previous podcast, a recent study by the USDA found that the number of foreign investors in the market for U.S. ag lands was small enough that they did not significantly or consistently influence land prices or lease rates.
Right, that's an important point. I know we've gotten questions on that here in different webinars that you've led with the Center for Ag Profitability. But Larry, I want to thank you for this information. You've been looking a lot into these issues and very timely as it's been in the news again. And listeners can find this article and more work from Dr. Larry Van Tassell, Agricultural Economics Professor and Director of the Center for Ag Profitability, up on our website at cap.unl.edu. Thanks again, Larry.
Thank you, Ryan. It's been a pleasure.
Nebraska Farmcast is a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. For the latest research-based information and education resources to manage your farm or ranch operation, visit our website at cap.unl.edu. That's cap.unl.edu.